Hope all is well. We're back today as we're going through the book, The Zaddik by Rabbi Shmuel Dresner on the teachings of Rabbi Yaakov Yosef of Polnoy, he was one of the first one of the first disciples of the Best of the Bel Shem Tov. Um, I think I did the first segment on Facebook and was not able to transfer it over to the YouTube page, but we're going to continue trying to finish chapter 1 today. Very interesting things here, and how we usually do. We'll read this and we'll share our thoughts today, what it means to me, what it means to other people who are connected, who are coming from a connection to Yeshua and his teachings, and how does that connect to the philosophy, the science of Hasidut within Torah. Like I said in the first video, I believe that Hasidut is here and it is able to do rectification to a lot of misunderstandings in Yeshua's teachings. Yeshua, as said by a few scholars, Jewish scholars who were not believers themselves, Gezer Vermes was a believer. Interestingly, he converted he's Jewish. He converted to Judaism because he was raised Christian, and then uh, this is the way he stayed. I believe he left his belief in Jesus as Messiah. But he's a great historical scholar, and also Shmuel Safrai also explained that Yeshua was like a first century Chassid of the Chassidim Harishonim, the first ones, the first pious ones. They're quoted in the book of Maccabees and in the Talmud, etc. They're spoken about various times there. I'm not saying that is, you know, without a doubt the same phenomenon that happened in the 17th century with the Best, but both the Best and other Hasidic masters that rose after him, even his great grandson Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, explained that Hasidut is nothing new, but it is very, very ancient, found in the Torah. So we're going to get right to it. We're going to get right to trying to finish this first chapter and giving our thoughts on it. Okay, there's a couple things here. It's going to be a short video. There's a couple things here that I wanted to touch on. So getting here into page 33, I'm getting right into it. It says like this. Perhaps no aspect of religious life suffered so much as prayer, which, because of its exalted nature, is easily profaned. According to ritual law, a Jew may not have chametz, anything which is leavened, in his possession during Passover. Before the holy day, every dwelling and shop was carefully examined, and all traces of chametz removed. That's leaven. Explaining why we are required before Passover to inspect even the synagogues for chametz, Rabbi Yaakov Yosef said this: "It is well that we are taught to examine the synagogues too, for the houses of study and the houses of prayer need to be searched for chametz, leavening of the Yetzer Hara, the evil impulse. Thus, we search out the custom of honoring and raising a man when he attends services on the Sabbath or on a holiday, because very often he comes only for that honoring. Likewise, it is well to search out the idle gossip, arguments, jealousy, and hatred there." End quote. And this sounds fairly familiar, right? And I mean, it sounds almost identical to many of the teachings of Yeshua on the same issues. For example, I'll read you some. Says like this. Yeshua says, he said, "Look out and beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the Sadducees." Okay, and I'm going to use some commentary by one of my good friends and teachers, Chus Kasal, in his commentary in the book of Matthew. He has this to say on this passage. He says, he refers to the two groups who had come earlier to test him in the beginning of the chapter. Mark renders more accurately, "Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and of Herod." That's Mark 8:15, which comes to prove these two groups did not represent the whole sect, but rather only those who were influenced by Herod. Okay. Um, then I wanted to read this part of the verse 12 that says, they understood that he was against the teaching of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. So Chus Casals gives this religious and historical context to this passage. He says, this poses a difficulty. The traditional interpretation of this passage cannot be correct, since it overlooks the fact that, as a matter of fact, Pharisees and Sadducees had different and even opposing doctrines and teachings. Furthermore, the teaching of Yeshua pretty much resembles that of the Pharisees. Various scholars have said that. There's even a whole book on that. Hence, the phrase they understood must be taken at face value. This is what they understood and not necessarily what Yeshua's words actually meant. The leaven that Yeshua had in mind was not their doctrine or theology, but the hypocrisy which they taught, which expressly stated in the Gospel of Luke, Luke 12:1. That's exactly what it says. It says like that. It says the leaven of hypocrisy. And this is one of the major objections of Yeshua towards many of the religious leaders of his day, not necessarily in accords to the Pharisees and their theology or the beliefs, but of hypocrisy, saying one thing but doing another. Okay. Truth continues, says, this is proven by the fact that whenever Yeshua confronts them, he attacks their hypocrisy and not the theology. Hypocrisy, which emerges from the evil, the Gemara says this, the Talmud says, hypocrisy, which emerges from the evil inclination that is within, is like leaven in the dough. Barakot 17a. It is not visible at first, but it then contaminates the entire bread. It is similar with those who externally study and observe Torah, but their heart is inflated with their ego. And just to quote another source, so we can see this connection, this is from the Shema Yisrael on Haggadah of Pesach, of Passover, from the Magid, Ramban Gamaliel, three things. 4:1, it says, Passover in the present. Why do we eat matzah? We try to arouse the holiness and the presence of the Shekhinah, as our ancestors did, by not allowing the yeast to rise within us. Okay, I mean, that's like, I mean, not only Yeshua had critiques for the Pharisees, but so did the rabbis and the sages of the Talmud also had critiques for the Pharisees. There's various quotes, maybe you guys have already heard of them, where they discuss 7 different types of Pharisees, and maybe only one something is said in a positive, because during that time, not all the Pharisees, but many of them were into hypocrisy. There was a lot of stuff going on there. And so the Talmud too has critiques and rebukes for the Pharisees, and even more so towards the Sadducees, who were heretics. Okay, so let's get back to the book. It says like this. Boom, 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 boom. Many of the people are satisfied with a minimum of worship, going to the synagogue only in the morning, and even these prayers are recited by rote in a hurried fashion. Wow. I mean, that's, again, almost word for word things that you find in the Gospels within Yeshua's teachings, right? He says like this. Yeshua says, then the Perushim, the Pharisees and the scribes, came to Yeshua from Jerusalem and said, why do your disciples break the tradition of the elders, for they do not wash with their hands when they eat? And during this time, Natilat Yadayim was something that a lot of the religious elite class were doing. It came from the priest, but it wasn't something that everyone among the commoners were doing. Okay, it's still some time before Nitilat Yadayim became part of the halacha, and during Yeshua's days, it was not. Many people were doing it, but it wasn't as fluent as it became. So it says, he answered them, and why do you break the commandment of God for the sake of your custom? Yeshua answered, for God commanded, honor your father and your mother, and whoever reviles father or mother must surely die. But you say, if anyone tells his father or his mother, what you have gained from me is given to God. It's part of the commandments as well. He need not honor his father So for the sake of your custom, you have made void the word of God. You hypocrites. There it is. Well did Isaiah prophesy of you when he said, these people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrines the commandments of men. And so there it is. This is exactly what Rabbi Yaakov Yosef of Polnoy is saying is part of his was happening in his community during his time. Okay, I'll read it again. He says, um, many of the people are satisfied with a minimum of worship, going to the synagogue only in the morning, and even these prayers are recited by rote and in a hurried fashion. They are humble regarding spiritual matters, being satisfied with a minimum. But this is not the case with material matters, the pleasures of this world, for they feel that no one is entitled to wealth and honor except themselves. The prayers of such persons jeopardize all communal prayer, for it is impossible to pray with a congregation which observes the commandments by rote, by 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 having like a custom, a manner, but your heart is away from it. This is the main point. A habitual manner that your heart and your mind are disconnected. This is the paninimus, the internality. This is the main thing that Yeshua combated. This is the main thing that he taught against. That's why it was so important. He was like a Musar preacher, uh, preaching, trying to wake the people up and turning them to tshuva, to connect back to God. This was the main thing. This is one of the main things that Hasidut does as well. That a breakdown in the spiritual life of the people had occurred, a breakdown which affected the community itself in its relation to the outside world, seems beyond question. Yaakov Yosef even confesses the occurrence of the worst crime one Jew could commit against another. In our time, there's a quote, he says, in our time, there has been informing before the government. This is exactly what happened to Yeshua. He was informed and given to the government to Rome by corrupt priests. Uh, according to Torah law, it's one of the worst sins that you can commit. Okay? So then it says, this breakdown, however, did not express itself in a radical outer change. On the surface, everything seemed to continue as before. The Shabbat was kept. The holy days were marked. The Torah was studied. Talit and tefillin were donned. Few persons ate non-kosher food. Same thing how it was in the first century. Same thing. The rabbis explained the second temple was not destroyed because, as the first temple, which was destroyed because of idolatry, murder, adultery, um, they were not like lacking in Torah observance. The second temple was not destroyed because of lack of scholars. The sages explained it was destroyed because of sinat chinam, baseless hatred, which is a hypocrisy if you are keeping Torah but you hate your brother. Again, this is Hasidut. This is the main thrust of Hasidic teaching, and this is exactly what Yeshua of Nazareth taught, the ancient rabbi of Galilee. The institutions of Jewish life apparently maintained their traditional functions. And yet, according to Yaakov Yosef, something had gone wrong. Something was lacking. That inner devotion for which all else existed, the the internality, the being, uh, observing the Torah, okay, keeping the Torah for its own sake, serving God for his own sake, because he is the creator, because you love him, not for any external purposes, not for any ulterior motives. The mitzvot, the commandments, were ordained that man might come closer to his creator as a way to attach to God, that a bit of spirit might enter his life. They were to be the means to a higher end, but in the course of time, they had become ends in themselves, and thus, an inevitable consequence, the very means were corrupted. If the heart and the mind is not connected for the right reasons to Hashem, then we've gotten everything wrong. And Rabbi Yaakov Yosef is going to explain in a parable what was happening. What was left was often hard, rigid, unbending, easily giving rise to anger and strife, engendering hatred and rivalry, opening the door to the chief of all transgressions, pride. This is exactly what was going on in the atmosphere of the first century to Yeshua and with some of the rabbis he was having interactions with. Nobody wanted to listen. Nobody wanted to say, serve God for his own sake. A parable which Rabbi Yaakov Yosef was fond of telling, here it is, and retelling perhaps best portrays the condition of his age. I heard a tale of an apprentice who learned his trade from a smith. After he had mastered it, he made a list, point after point, of how he must go about his craft. He did not mark down, however, that he should first ignite a spark for the fire, because this was obvious and hardly needed to be mentioned. Now he went to work at the king's palace, but, alas, found to his dismay that he was unable to perform his duties. He was soon dismissed. Finally, he returned to his master, who reminded him of the first principle, which he had forgotten. The young blacksmith may have learned how to weld the hammer, how to shape the metal, how to blow the bellows. He may have mastered all the skills of his craft, but one thing he had forgotten, without which all his knowledge, all his talent, all his experience were of no avail, how to kindle the spark. The spark in here, the spark in your mind, can never be lacking in our muna, in our faith, in our service to God, in our avodas Hashem. Okay? Rabbi Yaakov Yosef continues. He says, the duties of Torah study and prayer have to be fulfilled. But above all else is the yearning, the spark of flame which sets fire to hit la chavut, the craving, the longing for his love, the internality, the true motives to serving God correctly. Forgotten was the obvious and self evident that all the commandments of the Torah, study, prayer, Shabbat, and festival, were only for the sake of drawing closer to Hashem. A relearning of the first principle was necessary. This was the call of Yeshua and of the apostles, was to return to God and return back to the first principle. A return to the master to learn the first principle was the spiritual need of the times. And I'll end there because the next time we get on, we'll be in chapter 2. But I wanted to share some of those thoughts with you guys, which were quite amazing. As I was reading, I couldn't help but see all those connections to certain things that happened in the life of the apostles and in the life of Yeshua, who is said to be a chassid of the first century. May you guys all be blessed, take care, be safe, and to our next time. Peace.